Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Ahnaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, who is the advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, who joins us each week to give us a brief overview of the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session from the audience. And if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Ahnaf, and good evening from Israel. For those who don't know, tonight and tomorrow is Yom HaShoah, Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day. So a lot of things shut down tonight and tomorrow, places of leisure, restaurants, even the major television channels are only showing Holocaust-related programming. It's a day of great solemnity here in Israel. Just wanted to recognize that at the beginning. But going on to sort of what's made the news in the last week, the most important arena, let's say, on a more sort of wider scale, is the whole issue with Iran, the negotiations, the window of opportunity. And I'd like to start there. Israel has felt, or many in Israel has felt, that there is no greater window of opportunity to attack Iran's nuclear weapons program than is currently. There are four major reasons why. First of all, as we know, over the last, 18 months, the Islamic Republic of Iran's ring of fire, so-called axis of resistance, has pretty much crumbled or been destroyed. Talking about Hamas, Hezbollah, Assad, which was a very important aspect. Even if Assad and the old Syrian regime didn't necessarily fight Israel, it was certainly a conduit for Hezbollah and a way for Iran to get arms, money, funding, support, whatever it is, to Hezbollah, the Shiite proxies in Iraq, and the Houthis, who are taking quite a beating night after night by the US. The second reason is since October 2024, when Israel struck a lot of sites in Iran to do with Iran's ballistic missile program, but most importantly took out a lot of the defenses around areas associated with Iran's nuclear weapons program, specifically the S-300s, which was a Russian-made or developed defensive system that Iran got, that for many years Israel was worried about, but it managed to pretty much enter and leave Iran pretty much without any they were detected, but they weren't, no one was shot down. And Israel showed Iran that it can attack anywhere, and taking out pretty much its major defensive weapons and leaving it, as some would say, naked if Israel should need to return or want to return to attack. Another reason is that, as I said, Assad has gone and the Shiite proxies have been quelled to a certain extent. So Israel would have, to a certain extent, not a free run on Iran, but certainly a freer run. The third reason is that Iran hasn't been as weak economically in quite a long time, if ever. Their currency is just crashing by the day. Economically, it's in real trouble and getting worse with the potential snapback sanctions in October, more and more sanctions being placed on Iran by the week by the Trump administration. And obviously we know internally there is a lot of anger against the regime because perhaps of the funding of its proxies, because of the way they've run the country, the jackboot they've got on the heads of Many Iranians, the protests because of the woman who was killed when she wasn't wearing her hijab. It just shows a country really socially extremely weak, at least in relation to the regime. But finally, perhaps arguably most importantly, is you have one of the most Israel supportive administrations in history. But with that, it's a double-edged sword, and I'll explain why. When the Obama administration started negotiating with Iran, with other countries, obviously, the P5+1, there was a way for Netanyahu to try and sort of influence from the outside negotiations. He used the Republican Party on the Hill to attack Obama. We remember that he got that invitation to speak in Congress, and he was able to get quite a lot of support across the US, largely through his Republican allies. If Bibi understands that he's restrained, he can't go against Trump, first of all, because as we've seen, those who go publicly against Trump, as Bibi did against Obama, would obviously receive quite a backlash, as Zelensky and some others have received. You do not go out publicly against President Trump, perhaps even privately. And there's no real plan B. He can't rally Republicans. He won't find much sympathy amongst Democrats. So really, there's a high level of constraint here. The only possible tactic for Netanyahu at this point is to try and influence pretty much from the outside. And we did see some of this when Ron Dermer, the strategic affairs minister, who is pretty much the right hand of Netanyahu, and the Mossad head, David Barnea, were dispatched to try and influence Witkoff, who is the lead negotiator with Iran, ahead of the second round of negotiations. We know that the third round, I believe, will take place in Oman on Sunday. So far, the negotiations from both sides are sounding positive. We obviously don't know exactly what's going on, but both sides are talking positively about the negotiations themselves, even though the Iranians are obviously unhappy about the sanctions that are being placed on them during these talks themselves. There is a major concern in Israel about Witkoff himself. There seems to be some confusion exactly what he's doing, whether he knows the Iran nuclear file well enough. Let's put it on the table. The nuclear file is a very complicated issue. It's not just a simple military program. There are many different arenas and areas. If we go back to the JCPOA, it was a very, very complicated agreement. Perhaps that's one of the fallbacks of the agreement, and Iran felt that it could bypass it because it was so detailed and so intricate, enriching to this level, but not at this amount, and this, that, and the other, and all this. And, Witkoff doesn't really have that background, and there's a concern that no one really on his team has the requisite background. And what we did see was a real sort of confusing fuddling of the issue by Witkoff, where after there was a feeling that the US's position was that Iran wouldn't have a nuclear program at all, and the only option is really to not just restrain it, but to completely dissolve it. We did hear in an interview, I can't remember who it was with, some American news channel, where basically he said that Iran could enrich uranium, I think it was to 3.75, which was the original limits in the JCPOA. And let's not forget, it was Trump himself who called it the worst agreement in history. And when he won the first elections, he removed the US from the JCPOA itself. So there were many in Israel at the highest levels who are aghast at that. But it seems also in the US, there were some who also had a major problem, because we did see a more controlled press release put out the next day by Witkoff saying, absolutely, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapons program. Obviously, he didn't openly say he made a mistake, but clearly walking back those remarks. What Israel is seeking, and from what they're hearing from their American counterparts, it seems something where there's a lot of support, is what's called the Libyan model. Let's not forget that Muammar Gaddafi, who's obviously no longer with us, after the fall of Saddam Hussein, he got very concerned that he was next in line, the West were going to attack him. So he voluntarily gave up his own nuclear weapons program. He allowed some of it to be taken abroad, and he destroyed and had the West destroy his nuclear weapons program. There was no containment, there was no limits. It was completely destroyed. That is what Israel would like to see. That's what the more hawkish elements in the Trump administration would like to see. The Iranians have said it's a non-starter. They said that they have an absolute national right to a nuclear program. They claim that it's nothing to do with nuclear weapons. They claim that there was a fatwa. I think it was Ayatollah Khamenei who wrote a fatwa that it's against Islamic law to have nuclear weapons. We know that obviously that's not true, and now we see, sort of on a daily event, even the IAEA has basically said that there are so many elements of the Iranian program that are not conducive for a civilian nuclear program that that no one believes it. But what is most worrying Israel is to put a time limit. The Iranians are very good at procrastinating, at moving negotiations on and on and on. They know that the longer it goes on, the more they'll be able to hide their nuclear program, as they're doing now, deeper and deeper underground, spread it further around the nation, perhaps restore some sort of defense mechanisms, shields, missile programs, whatever it is. And the longer it goes on, and maybe even they could delay it to a point where we get closer to the American midterms, where obviously the Trump administration will be more distracted. And if they lose that, then perhaps then there's a problem, with Congress, and they won't have the control that they do at the moment. What Israel is saying really behind the scenes to the Americans is it's not against an agreement, but it does believe that agreement should only come after military action, not before. There is no real agreement that Iran are going to agree to, which really stops permanently Iran's nuclear program. And there is also a concern in Israel, as there is in other parts of the world, that a military action itself will not completely destroy Iran's nuclear program, but perhaps a combination of the two. The disagreement they have with the Americans at the moment is you don't negotiate before military action. You first use military action, and then you take out the only real leverage they have. Iran's only real leverage for speaking to the international community is the fact that they are close to nuclear weapons. In fact, there is a great worry that at this point, Iran is doing something which they didn't do a number of years ago, and really racing to try and get a relatively, in relative terms, a small rudimentary nuclear weapon. Something along the lines of the North Korea model. North Korea became a nuclear power nation because they basically built a relatively rudimentary nuclear weapon, and they tested it. And from that moment on, they became a nuclear state. If Iran does that, it changes everything. And there is a feeling where they could do that perhaps in weeks, and not the more sophisticated program that they were originally going for. Not to say that they would stop the more sophisticated program, but just to run ahead to create something, and then they have even greater leverage. So that is also a great concern in Israel. On Gaza, there still doesn't seem to be a decision on a wider attack that's been brewing for a number of weeks now. There hasn't been that massive call up of hundreds of thousands of Israeli reserves that would be necessary for any sort of attack on Gaza. The reserves themselves probably wouldn't go into Gaza, or at least the majority of them. They would go and protect other areas in Israel, or in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, or perhaps on the northern border, because the reserves on the whole, are people who have jobs, who have families. They're not the young recruits. They've been in the reserves perhaps for 300 plus days over the last year. So there's a feeling that they want to, not put them on the front lines, but they would need them for where the recruits would leave, where, as I said, whether it's in Judea and Samaria, the north or the south, or wherever it is. There seems to be also a disagreement at this point about what's going to happen with the humanitarian aid. For many days, if not weeks, the Israeli government has said that there will be no humanitarian aid until there's an agreement. But there seems to be a lot of pressure to put humanitarian back in. There was quite a lot of humanitarian aid that came in before the breaking of the ceasefire. So there's no real concern about a famine at the moment. But the longer it goes on, not to say that there will be a famine, but certainly there will be more problems. The whole issue of humanitarian aid during the fighting is it basically replenishes Hamas's cash reserves, because as we know, they steal humanitarian aid, they sell it, they basically control life in the Gaza Strip as a result of it. Interestingly, today there was a cabinet meeting about this, and the government floated the idea of the IDF controlling humanitarian aid. The IDF chief of staff, the new chief of staff, Netanyahu's own choice, Zamir, basically said, "We will not do that. I will not ask the IDF to do that." One can understand why. And Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister and also minister in the defense ministry, shot back and said, "You will do as you're told. We're the ones who direct policy. You're the ones who enact it." So the tensions are there, even when Netanyahu gets his choice in the security apparatus. And these tensions are really, really racking up at the moment due to the real major event of the week, which was Ronen Bar, the current Shin Bet leader, sent an affidavit to the Supreme Court in Israel. Supreme Court at the moment is deciding what to do about this crisis between Bar and Netanyahu. Netanyahu fired Ronen Bar, and some NGOs took the government to court and said he has no right to fire Ronen Bar, at least not without a whole process, due process, and he can't do so because of political reasons. There have to be professional reasons. Ronen Bar, the last minute, sent this affidavit along with a secret annex where he showed proof of what he said. And really, it was a major, major event in Israel, because he accused the prime minister of basically trying to use the Shin Bet for political reasons, whether it's to postpone his testimony in his criminal trials, Netanyahu's criminal trials, or act against anti-government protesters, or some other things that he accused. And he also said that Bar's firing was only a result of the Shin Bet being asked to look into what's being called Qatargate, that people very close to Netanyahu were paid by Qatargate, perhaps through proxies. And this is an ongoing investigation. And that was, according to Bar and his supporters, that was the moment when Netanyahu decided to fire him. And that is extremely problematic. Bar himself has said he probably will resign in the middle of May. But at the moment, the Supreme Court now doesn't just have to rule on a procedural issue. Does the government have the right to fire the Shin Bet? Does it have to go through a certain procedure? Does he have to enunciate exactly what the issues are, whether it's political or whatever? But now, with these accusations, the Supreme Court now has to look into, is Bar correct? Is Netanyahu correct? Obviously, the government will have a right of response. And they'll have to try and paint a picture of what they believe is happening and what they can do about it. This could really create a constitutional crisis, because if they decide that the government does not have the right to fire Bar, I don't necessarily see that happening, but the government will ignore that. Bar himself, as I said, is on his way out. That could prevent a lot of things, but now the Supreme Court has ammunition to really do something that could, as I said, lead us towards this sort of crisis, perhaps take away control from firing senior security figures because of Bar's revelations. It's going to be very interesting and also extremely explosive. On the issue of divisiveness, as I said at the beginning, tonight and tomorrow is Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's interesting to hear the two speeches by the two leaders of Israel. We had President Herzog, who gave the speech at Yad Vashem as traditional, where he spent most of his speech. The main theme was to end divisions. He said, we are too divided, especially in this war, and that is the worst thing that can happen at this point, and we have to stop this divisiveness. Netanyahu used his speech at Yad Vashem shortly afterwards, basically to tout his policies, to show that he is the one who's preventing the next Holocaust, that Hamas are the Nazis, and he's the one who said that he's going to fight to the end, even though many told him he couldn't. So we sort of, even in a solemn day like this, unfortunately, politics are still there, and we can still see the lines of communication by Israel's leadership. But it's clear from some of the things that are going on domestically, Israel is really as divided as it was before October 7th. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Now, I will begin with a question here from Robert Larrick, who asks, what do you think of the Iranian-Russian security treaty, and is this a concern of the US president or for Europe? And what is Turkey's response to this?
Well, Russia has its own issues, as we know. It's fighting Ukraine. It's taken a massive blow. As we know from the beginning, Putin thought that this would be a relatively short war. It hasn't been. It's cost Russia a lot diplomatically, economically, and militarily. I don't envision a situation where Russia will actively become involved. Can and will it assist with munitions, just as the West is doing in Ukraine? Absolutely. But just as the West is doing in Ukraine, it will probably stop short of any direct military involvement. So it's a concern because, as I said before, Russia did supply Iran with the S-300s, and it's got a more technologically advanced system now, which could assist the Iranians, probably not as much as the Iranians would like, because they believed in the S-300s. And then Israel showed that, that belief wasn't really warranted. But then I don't think there's too much worry or concern that the Russians will become involved in the actual fighting. Anything's possible, but they're too distracted. They've been weakened themselves. One can imagine if that happened, perhaps it would up the stakes. Perhaps the Americans would become even more involved. So it's more on paper, it's more of a show, it's more of a diplomatic move. I don't think militarily the Russians will be actually involved on the ground. As far as Turkey to do with Iran, was that the question? What will Turkey do?
What
If
is
Israel,
what is Turkey? I guess what do they think of this? What might their response be?
Well, they're a rival of Iran in the sort of Islamic arena on the one hand, but they're also on the same side to a certain extent as far as Israel. And Turkey wouldn't come to Iran's rescue. Let's not forget, also commenting on the first piece, that there was before the war an understanding or an agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is pretty historic. And we don't know exactly what was in that agreement, what the promises are. We think at least that there was a promise from Iran not to attack Saudi Arabia, not to use its proxies to attack Saudi Arabia. Since that agreement, we didn't see, for example, the Houthis attack Saudi Arabia, as we saw a number of years ago. So there is, I wouldn't say there's a warming. They don't like each other, Saudi Arabia and Iran, and Saudi Arabia would not come to their assistance. But certainly there seems to be an understanding not to openly hurt each other at this point. So again, would Saudi Arabia be involved in some sort of military attack? No. But would they allow their airspace to be used? That's a debate. That would be, sort of, I don't even know if tactically or strategically you need it, but there are other countries which also might be pressured by Saudi Arabia as the leader of the Sunni Muslim world, not to allow Israel or even the Americans to use their airspace for an attack. But I don't think there is any country that would put its armed forces to defend Iran. Yes, we would see the Houthis. Yes, we would perhaps see the Iraqi Shiite groups. Yes, perhaps no. But I don't think there would be an army or air force or anything like that of another country that would actually come to Iran's aid.
Great, thank you. Now, turning to a more recent development here, Mahmoud Abbas said just earlier, quote, that he's calling for, quote, the sons of dogs in Hamas to turn over the hostages. Of course, meanwhile, as far as I understand, he has not ceased his pay for slave program. What do you make of his remarks?
Well, first of all, Fatah and Hamas, there's no love lost. If Israel was to defeat and destroy Hamas, there would be few greater fans outside of Israel than Mahmoud Abbas. He has had to take this difficult position. He hates Hamas, but he also has to show that he's not Israel's lapdog or even a fan of Israel. So yes, the pay for slay, it's been moved. It's been officially taken out of social services and put somewhere else, but it hasn't really stopped. And as we know from the beginning, Fatah's clerics, incited in the days after October 7th, calling it, glorious days and all that sort of thing. So Israel doesn't see, at least this government doesn't see too much difference between Fatah and Hamas. But it's clear that Fatah are fed up, that they see that there are cracks within support of Hamas. They perhaps believe in these demonstrations in Gaza from anti-Hamas Gazans. Perhaps they think that's an opportunity to rally some support towards them. So to use this colorful language that he did against Hamas is relatively rare. But again, alongside calling to give up the hostages, he also said, by keeping the hostages, you're just giving Israel legitimacy to continue killing our people. We need to give them back the hostages and then end the war and allow us to govern. So again, we just see that there are some internal Palestinian aspects involved here, not necessarily anything for Israel to get too excited about. There's pretty much consensus in this current government and even some in the opposition that the PA, Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas can also not play a role in the future of Gaza. There are many around the world who believe that that's just untenable because you have to have some power, you have to have some governance, and the only other body able to do that is the PA. But Netanyahu stated on many occasions that's simply a non-starter for him.
All right, thank you. Now, Eric Salkov asks, what can you tell us about the security leaks of Israeli plans to bomb Iran? And will those leaks hurt future Israeli plans?
There's a debate with all these things. Who leaked it? Was it the Americans? Was it the Israelis? Was it to send a message? Was it to show Israeli public that Israel had planned to do it and they were just prevented from doing it? So when the longer they put it off, so Netanyahu can say, well, I wanted to, but I was prevented. Is it the Americans to try and dissuade the Israelis? It's sort of unclear exactly. Some of the details, not the nitty-gritty details, but some of the overall details of what Israel would do, or at least what Israel would not do. At one point, there was even talk of landing some forces, but then that was nixed for more aerial attacks. But I can't imagine there are too many surprises there for the Iranians on what an attack would look like. But it's certainly worrying that these sort of things do take place. The leak is probably harmful, not just for what it might show, but also the fact that the worst thing that can happen, and something that President Trump tried to deal with tonight, is that if there's any daylight between Israel and the US, there seems to be. And President Trump was very quick tonight to basically said on all the issues, tariffs, Gaza, Iran, the US and Israel stand on the same side. They want the same things. So that's really helpful towards Israel to show its enemies that, they are together, they are united. There is no daylight. Yes, there may be differences on tactics. It's clear Israel doesn't see too much good coming out of negotiations, but it's something that they're going to have to stomach at the moment and relay their concerns as privately as possible. But these sort of leaks certainly don't help the relationship.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley. I am afraid we are all out of time for this week's podcast. I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us this week.
Uh, Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. Now, for our viewers and listeners, please join us on Friday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, for our second in our series of our Middle East Forum roundtable discussions. This week's panel will feature Lori Regan, as well as the Middle East Forum's Jonathan Spire, Clifford May from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and Michael Doran from the Hudson Institute. As always, we thank you all again for joining us and for your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.